Welcome back to what I believe is an essential section in any Excel user's tool belt, which is pivot tables. And do you remember all those sum-if formulas that we used to make our employee sales graph? We had to make a really long sum-ifs formula wrapped in an if formula based on each employee. Well, imagine if we could do that in literally seconds. Wouldn't that be awesome? Well, that's where pivot tables come in. So in this section, we're going to be learning about some of the pivot table basics. We'll be creating this data set right here in seconds. So first, let's go ahead and create a pivot table. Let's go to our unclean data. Let's go and unhide some of these columns. Now in some basic courses in Excel, they either skip this section entirely or they briefly cover it. So in this advanced course in Excel, I'll be dedicating the entire last section to pivot tables because I believe they're absolutely essential, and once you get used to them, they're really useful and very easy to use. So let's go ahead and create one. But first, let's go ahead and get rid of one column which isn't very helpful. Can you look around? Can you see which one it is? It is the states column. There's only one state. And pivot tables are all about grouping data. Well, this is only one group. So let's go ahead and delete it. Alright, so now to make our pivot table, go ahead and click anywhere inside our data set, inside this table. And what you could do, you could go to Insert and go to Pivot Table. So insert Pivot Table. Now I have already made a shortcut right here, which is the pivot table, and you do that simply by right-clicking and click to Add to Quick Access Toolbar. Now it's grayed out for me because I've already done that. But I encourage you to go ahead and put it on your Quick Access Toolbar because I use this quite often. Once you get used to Excel, you probably will too. So I'm going to click anywhere. I'll go to Insert Pivot Table. And of course, it selected my entire range, which is Order Table. Now, if you didn't have your data in a table, it would just select everything as long as there are no missing columns or no missing rows. You would try to select everything. And by default, it says New Worksheet. You could click Existing Worksheet and then go to the location. But I'll go ahead and leave it on the default and insert the pivot table in a new worksheet. Press OK. Now we're in our pivot table section. Notice over here it says Pivot Table Fields. You might say, now what is a pivot table field? Well, those are all the columns. So in databases, sometimes they refer to columns as fields. And then they refer to rows as records. So anytime you see something like that, if you see either fields, it's actually referring to the columns that we have. So first name, go to our unclean data, column A, it's the first name. Then column B is last name, then full name. Likewise, you'll see first name, last name. So it's in that order. So if we went to our unclean data and we reordered it, then we refresh this data, it'll put it in that order instead. So let's go ahead and make that same graph that we made in a previous lesson, but we're going to do this very quickly. Watch how we do this. I'm going to press Control page down, 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 down. Here we go. So this table right here. So in the columns, we have 2019, 2020. Then we have the employees over here on the left. So all these rows. And then we have our data right here. So let's go ahead and make this. And we're going to make this very, very fast. Let's see how fast we can do it. Let's go to our order year. Go to columns. Now automatically it's put the years in the columns. Let's go to our salesperson, put it in the rows. So now each one of these salespeople is in the rows over here. See how automatically it's changing it? Go to our order totals, put them in the values. And we'll go over sorting and filtering in the next lesson, but I do want to quickly sort this. I want to edit out anything in 2018. Then I'll go to our design. I'll get rid of these grand totals. Off for rows and columns. And voila. So how long do you think it took us to make this in a previous lesson? Took us quite a bit. We had to do a big long sum if formula wrapped in an if formula. But very quickly, just by dragging and dropping some of these fields in different rows and columns, we've quickly made the exact same data. Now let's go ahead and double check it. Let's go to Angela at 17,227. Let's go over here, control page down, down, down. Okay, let's go to Angela, 17,227. Look at that. Wasn't that quick? So already you can see how much time making a pivot table can save you in the long run. So this is where pivot tables really shine. They're really good at grouping data. It says, okay, look up in the main data all the records with Angela in 2019 and then sum them. And very quickly you can see the sum if results. Now let me show you how I did that. In the right hand corner, you'll see a column section, rows, values, and then a filter section. So by quickly dragging and dropping these different fields into these little corners, you can change how your data is viewed. Let's go to our filter section at the top left. Now you can filter your data by any one of these. So let's say we did our order year in the filter section. So instead of seeing the year, it's now just up here in a filter section. So now it's not visible, but we can still filter it. Is at 2019 and 2020. So now it's showing us basically the grand totals for 2019 and 2020. Now we could filter out, say, filter out 2020. Now we have the totals of each of these sales reps just by 2019. I'm going to go ahead and switch that over to columns. And since I just filtered it to 2019, it still keeps that. Let's go ahead and get rid of that. So now we're just seeing the salesperson and the rows and the values of the order totals on the right hand side. So that's how filters work. You can filter it by anything you want. We can go to our cities. Say, okay, how did each one of these sales reps do in Anaheim? Well, this is how they did. So now we're just looking at the data in Anaheim. So another word for filter is also limiting. That's how I think of it. When I think of the word filter, I think of the word limit. So let's go ahead and limit the data just to Anaheim. So that's how filtering works. Now, of course, column, just like we did before, we want to go to our year, our order year, place it in columns, and it's still keeping that filter. Let's go ahead and include 2020. There we go. And notice if I click off the pivot table, all the fill settings disappear. If I click back on, there it is. So just something to keep in mind. Of course, the values, the only thing you should be putting in values are numbers. Now you can put other things in values, such as, let's do city in values. Basically, it's going to be a count. It's going to say, okay, how many times did Angela make a sale in 2019 for a particular city? Which is kind of weird to think about. Let's do an easier one. Let's do, how about products? There we go. Let's go ahead and take the year out. There we go. So now it says, okay, it's going to look at all the different products. Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, all the different products. And it's going to go to the unclean data and say, okay, where's Angela? It's going to filter out. Let's go to our salesperson. Let's go ahead and filter out everything except for Angela. It's going to say, okay, I filtered out everything but Angela. Now let's go to our product. It says, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's going to count all the way down until it comes up with a total. And apparently in this case it's 103. So let's go ahead and double check that. Let's say equals count if the range is the order table, open bracket, salesperson, press tab to complete, close the bracket. Criteria is Angela, So how many times did she make a sale, or how many products? Basically, it's just counting the products, which is the same thing as just counting the records. Press enter. 103. Look at that. So it's doing the same thing that I just did. When I came over here, I filtered by Angela, and you could count through that. But it's doing it much, much quicker. Go to unfilter that. Go to delete that. Now, of course, again, anytime you put something in the value section that's not a number, it's basically just going to give you a count. You can go summarize by, you can try to do a sum, but it's really not going to work. Control Z. A count is basically the only thing that's going to make sense, because you can't do any multiplication or anything like that. You can't say, okay, what is Roadrunner multiplied by Sylvester? You know, that doesn't make sense. So it's just going to do a count. Get rid of that. And of course, rows, anything you put in rows, it's just going to make them just like this on all these rows. So if I got rid of that, I put in city. Likewise, it would just give me a whole list of these cities, and then I could make sums based off of. I can do how many orders on what city. In the value section, it's going to sum all of them up. Anything you put in values, if it's a number, it usually does sum by default. If you put anything that's not a number, it'll usually do count by default. So that's kind of the basics of this section right here. So anything you put in columns, it's going to stretch it out this way. Anything you put in rows, it's going to stretch it out this way. Anything you put in values, it's going to basically do something similar to a sum if formula, and it's going to base it on all these rows over here. So it gives you all your totals. In the Analyze tab, we have quite a few different options we'll be looking at later. But just for the basic information, I do want to show you that the field list is this section over here. So you can click on it, it'll hide it. And if I click on it again, it'll shade it in dark gray, it'll show up again. So if you're ever on it and you ever accidentally click the X and then you click off it, you click back on it, it's not coming up, you say, where's the field list? Well, you can just go to Analyze, click Fields List again, and it'll bring it back up. So that's kind of the basics of how pivot tables work. In the next section, we'll be going over sorting and filtering and all the options you can do with that. But this is just to get your feet wet and show you all the possibilities of what is possible with pivot tables. I personally really like working with pivot tables. It makes everything so much easier to work with. Go ahead and play around with this data and see what else you can do, because the more you practice, the more you learn. So go ahead and practice filtering this and then putting things in different columns and different rows and values and see what happens. Because the more you play around with it, the more you learn and the more you understand. When we first made our chart in the checkbox lesson, it took us quite a while to do this. First, what I did, I had to copy the employees column in our unclean data. I pasted it here, and then I went to data, I went to remove duplicates, and that gave me this list right here. Then I had to make this complex if and sum ifs formula right here. Then I had to paste it here. I had to make the sum ifs formula based on the year and by the employee. So it took quite a while to do this. But in our pivot table, we did this pretty quickly. It was as simple as drag and drop from the rows, columns, and the values, and I had the same data. Like I said, Excel can be your best friend or your worst enemy, so make Excel your best friend and experiment with pivot tables. Take care, and I'll see you again in the next lesson.